Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Very sorry for the delay. We had a technical issue. I'm here in Kathmandu, Nepal, and the internet was a bit jittery, but hopefully now it's solved. And we're very happy to welcome you all today. And good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. And today we're very happy to have Christian Bernert with us. And we've been talking about this lecture. And finally, you're all here. Also, I know Grig is here today, Grig Oprea from Romania. She's running a very big association for studies of what happens after death. So there are many people interested in this topic. And of course, it's much more. Christian has been working for the Khyentse Vision Project. He's one of the main translators there. So this is a huge project of a very important Tibetan master. Of course, sort of backed and organized by Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who's doing incredible work with translation. So it's a pleasure to welcome Christian. It's a pleasure to welcome you all. And before we start, I have a few questions for Christian. But Christian, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and how you became interested in Tibetan studies before we start, I think it would be interesting for all of us to hear that. And then we can start. So thank you, Christian, and thank you all.
All right. Can you hear me well? Okay. Thank you, Jamyang, for the invitation, and thank you everyone for joining this little session here. Yeah, maybe just very briefly about myself, and I do have a tendency sometimes to ramble on a little bit. So please, Jamyang, don't hesitate to raise your voice or your virtual hand. I got interested into Tibetan studies from the Buddhist practitioner side. I didn't really ever intend to do that as a main occupation, as a main job, translation. I was just I was just seeking, like many people are seeking, and I happened to find an amazing, excellent teacher whom I followed, and for me it just made sense. I was at the crossroad in my life where I, was still undecided as to which direction I'm going to go, and I was so interested in Tibetan Buddhism that I started to study the language. I thought that's going to give me a very good access to the teachings, and so I did that first in Nepal. I started at the International Buddhist Academy in Kathmandu, very close to where you are now, in Tinchuli, up the road probably from where you are. And so I studied there every summer and still continue to do so. I started that in 2001, the first year that Institute started, and still return there every year. And parallel, I studied Tibetan studies and religious studies in Austria at the University of Austria and did my MA there. And after that, I moved to Nepal and I stayed there for 4.5 years. And then I moved to Vietnam. And now I'm currently in Thailand. Let's see where the wind blows me next.
Thank you, Christian. And did you mention that before starting you wanted to maybe recite something, aspiration prayers or something of the sort? So please feel welcome to do that. That's fine. Absolutely fine.
I'll share my screen if anyone wants to join. This is a little one of my strong interests in translation and in practice is to find an approach to singing, chanting in our own native languages, to incorporate the emotional side that is transported through music, through melody, through rhythm and meter. So that's something I'm very fascinated by. That in Khyentse Vision now we also have some concerted efforts to do that as a project, and and I have another project with a friend of mine, James, Thupten Sengye, who lives in Bhutan. The project called Padmaverse, where we versify practices, chants into metered English to be recited in English. So that's just a little spiel for to introduce why I like to do that. And let me share the screen. Mm, I think this is the one. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'll sing a melody. I apologize for any wrong notes. If it's too bad, just mute me. And those who wish to follow along, please do so with all your heart. So I wanted to do this at the beginning and also dedication at the end. So at least the very beginning and the very end of our session is impregnated with some meaningful lines, and the rest is we'll see what we'll do with the rest of the time. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha sublime, we seek refuge until awakening. By virtue of our giving and the like, may we awaken to benefit all. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha sublime, we seek refuge until awakening. By virtue of our giving and the like, may we awaken to benefit all. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha sublime, we seek refuge until awakening. By virtue of our giving and the like, may we awaken to benefit all. All right, just gonna correct the typo here. All right. Jamyang, so I thought I proposed this to Jamyang that we'll make some little bit maybe more informal interactive talk of this. I hope it's maybe more stimulating for the viewers. And also if I think from the viewers side, if there's questions, just you can interject and stop us in this conversation if you have some pertinent question to a particular point we are making.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christian. And actually, the very first question I wanted to ask you is exactly about the title which you chose for today's talk, which is Life Can Be Very Confusing If We Don't Understand Death. So, in general, my question is why does Tibetan Buddhism emphasize understanding death as something important for living well in our lives? Why is it such a key point while we are alive?
Yeah. So this quote actually comes from a Thai master from the Thai forest tradition. His name is Ajahn Chah. And I saw this quote in a brief interview that you can look up. There's a YouTube video. It's from an old BBC documentary called The Mindful Way. And I think there's very, very little video footage of this teacher, but in this video there are some short excerpts from an interview. And this quote comes from this master. So of course it's not exclusive to Tibetan Buddhism, even though Tibetan Buddhism does have a very, let's say, exclusive take to the whole subject of death and in particular what happens after. That's due to the nature of the Tibetan practices that are based on the Vajrayana teachings, on the workings of the subtle body and subtle mind. So this is an exclusive domain of Vajrayana and therefore of the Tibetan version, let's say, or the Tibetanized, not, I shouldn't say Tibetanized, the teachings that have been transmitted in Tibet. But generally, it's such a crucial aspect of all the teachings of the Buddha. Very, very famously, there's a quote where I think it's Ananda in conversation with the Buddha, where there's the analogy of the different footprints that you can see in the jungle, and so they compare the different sizes of footprints, and then there is this massive footprint, which is the footprint of the elephant, and he says all the footprints of all other animals, they fit inside this one footprint. And so he says, similarly, the contemplation of impermanence is the most supreme of all contemplations. So everything is based on that. I saw another version of that story where it says the contemplation of the Four Truths is embedded in, is the equivalent to this largest of all footprints. All the other footprints fit inside. So all the practices are based and rooted and contained within the Four Truths. But here in particular, sorry, let me mute my phone. Here in particular, the contemplation of impermanence can be regarded as one of the key and one of the king-like contemplations because it leads everything. Of course, we have in the Tibetan tradition, we have what is called the preliminary Ngondro practices, and you have the outer and then the inner preliminaries. And from the outer preliminaries, you have these contemplations on precious human life and impermanence and death. And it's these contemplations that turn the mind to the Dharma. And why did Ajahn Chah in this quote say that life can be very confusing if we don't understand death? So he comes from the forest tradition, and he says it's very important for the monks to live in the forest because in the forest you are in contact with nature. You are directly experiencing the way things arise and the way things cease. You just observe around you. You see the trees, you see the flowers, you see the leaves, and you see how things every season are born and die, are born and die, and so you just observe nature. And if we don't integrate into our picture of life, of what life means to us, and that's this vision of what life means to us is going to direct everything we do in our life. Clearly, it's the way we understand or the meaning we give to life, how we understand what this personality that I identify with, what this is. This will give a very important foundation and meaning to everything that we do. And so if we don't integrate into this vision of understanding ourselves and understanding life, if we don't integrate that notion of impermanence, of passing away, then it's one of the key features of all compounded phenomena. They have three characteristics. They arise, they remain for a while when the conditions are conducive to remain, and then they cease. They cease to be. All compounded phenomena have these three characteristics. So if we exclude one of these characteristics, the ceasing part, the impermanence, our view of reality, our view of our life is completely not in harmony with the way things are. And this can lead to all kinds of strange and confusing fantasies about what we should do with our lives, which in the end, when I want to find a more beautiful expression, but the expression that comes to mind when the shit hits the fan, when it's it's time, basically, when things actually fall apart, and we are bound to face the inevitable ending of this life, then it it might be a very, very big risk that not to have looked into not the possibility, the actuality of dying. And then that all sorts of regrets and so on. Oh, I should have, or would I have, concerned myself more with my impermanence. Maybe I would have led a kinder life. Maybe I would have done something meaningful, contribute to others' well-being, and so on and so forth. So, and that's not a kind of a grief that anyone wants to have on their deathbed, for sure. And yeah, so I think in this sense, contemplating, recollecting, reminding ourselves of the inevitable fact of death is just a very, very healthy human thing to do. It's nothing pessimistic at all. It's just very, very realistic. Just looking at things how they are. And the benefits are, if we start to look into the Buddhist path, the benefits are immeasurable, actually, because if that contemplation of impermanence and the death is really like an entrance to turning our mind towards the Dharma, towards something that's not limited by this present life, beginning with a good rebirth, but then further liberation and even complete awakening. So the benefits are absolutely incredible, and the drawbacks, the faults, the possible dangers of not doing that are immense. Just for this life, the great regrets we could have at the end of this life might be terrifying. And we don't want to enter, if we have the good fortune to approach the last moments of our life in a let's say conducive environment, a quiet environment, not in an accident, and so on, and we can very consciously face our death, then we don't want to be plagued by regrets. Definitely not. We want to be at ease, looking back at our lives and say, okay, this was a meaningful life I've spent, and now it's time to move on from this, to let go of this body, because that's just the nature of this body. It's going to be much easier to let go also, for sure, to see the nature of impermanent phenomena. There is again a quote by this Thai master Ajahn Chah, where he talks about cups, and he says that when he looks at the cup, he sees the cup already as broken. So he's not surprised when the cup eventually breaks. All these phenomena eventually have to break. So when the cup falls down, it's just an expression of the very nature of that compounded phenomena to one day fall apart. So it's not a big shock. But if we exclude that part of reality of that cup standing for all compounded phenomena, of course, if we exclude the reality that it's compounded and therefore it has to fall apart, and then it does break, then that can be, especially if we like that cup, if we have a history with that cup, it's going to be a shock, and it's going to be difficult to digest. And of course, the cup is a very mild example for the things that we have to let go of.
Thank you, Christian. And indeed, I think in Tibetan Buddhism, many times death is described not just as a single moment, but as you're saying, sort of as a gradual process, no? A mind training. And of course, later we can talk about dissolution of elements, for example, at the moment of death.
Yeah.
But how would you say that this process of gradual process of death, like, of course, the basic Buddha's realization of old age and sickness, how is it all compounded, sort of preparation for death as a gradual process? How would you describe it?
I think we can see this in different ways. One is in a very like coarse, gross way, seeing one life as, beginning in my case, 48 years ago, born in Austria and so on. And then at some point after this present moment, that body will die. But this very gross form of impermanence is just an expression of a subtle form of impermanence, a momentary change. So birth or coming into existence and remaining and dying, these are properties, when I said before, the three characteristics of compounded phenomena that all compounded phenomena share. And what are compounded phenomena? They are summarized in the Buddha's teaching in the five skandhas, the five aggregates of form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Everything that we identify with, that we cling on as I and as mine. So all these phenomena are subjected not only to a coarse impermanence that manifests at the end of what we call our life, but that manifests every single moment. Of course, this is not something that we can perceive directly with our eyes, and because it's too fast for a visual perception to register. But it's something that can be observed, and that can be inferred logically using reasoning. So of course, we just have to look at old photos, and we don't see our face aging every single day. But at some point, it may happen that we see ourselves and we say, can be a little shock. And for me, that, I mean, I'm 48, I'm not that old, but I remember very, very clearly when I saw my first gray hair. And I don't remember actually the year, but I remember the moment I was in the toilet in an airplane. So I was very close to the mirror and I wash my face. And then I look and I see this one white hair and I'm like, oh no. And I couldn't, like, it was still I know about all this impermanent stuff, but it was still the reality hit quite hard in that very moment. But that didn't come about like just that very moment in the airplane, of course. It was a very slow, gradual, uh, unnoticed change that happens moment by moment by moment, that just at some point we register on a coarse level. And it's a little bit, I think we can say it's similar with thoughts also, the impermanence of thoughts and the worlds that we think ourselves into conceptually, the birth, like when we have, I don't know, for example, I like coconut very much. And so if the conditions are not stimulating, then, the craving for coconut milk or something will not be triggered. But if the conditions, like now in Thailand, allow for me to make myself a coconut dessert, I can bring to birth this identity of me who wants to have a coconut dessert, and then I create actions and I create this whole world of having the experience of consuming coconut. And again, this is a mild example, but this is how we think ourselves into existence very, very quickly, just by a mere thought, and then the how do you call it, the proliferation, the continuation, the development of thought just leads from one thing to another. Then that leads to an action, and that leads to what do you call it, to the maturation of this desire into producing something that I can consume. And we have in this, if we see impermanence and arising, remaining, and ceasing in this way, we can see that in one day, even in 1 hour, there are so many births and deaths happening continuously on the level of thought, on the level of sensations, on the level of perceptions, and the ones on the level of the physical form, they are, of course, not very easy to perceive, but the fleeting phenomena on the level of the mind, I think we can more easily perceive these momentary changes coming into existence, ceasing, coming into existing, ceasing, and so on and so forth. And yeah, again, the coarse impermanence of the physical body and of the outer phenomena around us, they are just the outer manifestations of a subtle change that happens moment by moment. If there was no subtle change moment by moment by moment, then it's impossible for one day to be old, or for one a cup to be broken, or for one remote control not to work anymore. And it's, again, these are conceptually, it's so easy to understand and to say, okay, that makes sense. But it's such a whole different game to try to familiarize ourselves on the level of experience with these very simple truths in a way. And this is where the whole mind training and meditation comes in, because it's eventually we have to come to a deep acceptance of things. And deep acceptance, I don't think, can happen on a merely conceptual level. That's a very surface kind of scratching of things, but it has to become an integral part, or a direct experience. And this is only possible through training the mind and allowing the mind to become quiet and to become clear, and then using that clarity and stability of mind to observe the things just how they are.
Thank you, Christian. And as you mentioned, there's the sort of mental understanding of something, and like you struggled to accept your first white hair, and the surprise of it.
Yeah, not my first hair. That was okay.
Now, the first white hairs, and as you said, there's also, of course, the inevitable physical aging. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan medicine, on a gross level, sort of, we have these five elements. And often when you read these books like Tibetan Book of the Dead, where there's the description of the process of dying, I think it begins with the earth element and the sensation that you're sinking. And then they say also your lips become dry. And then apparently these are phenomena which do happen when you read these accounts of
Mm.
the moment of death, etc. So I was
Mm.
wondering if you could tell us a bit about how these moments affect the mind, let's say how the
Mhm.
physical, or
Yeah.
maybe subtle, you could say, with elements and channels and so forth, how these would affect the moment of death, if you have some traditional account maybe of it, of the
Yeah.
text you're working with, that would be interesting. Thank you.
So one thing I didn't do at the beginning, but I want to do, I want to say that now at least, is a big disclaimer that for sure I'm not an expert at all on all of these things. And so my hope is that whatever I share here, of course I've done some research and some work, translation work related to the subject. But my hope is that at least it's inspiring and interesting, so that people then do their own research and, request, in particular, go to their teachers, their lamas, and request teachings and instructions for this important topic, and not to take anything like, or to take everything with a grain of salt, because there might be a little bit misleading or maybe even wrong information. I hope I don't share wrong information, but it's always a possibility. So don't just accept whatever I say. I try my best, but I cannot really guarantee that it's going to be all correct. Yeah, so these actually, I prepared some slides. 1 second. For this process, dissolution process. This is such an incredible subject. And I for sure I would like to recommend everyone here to read the books. In particular, recently there's the not that recently, it's a few years I think already ago. Living is Dying by Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who really gave a very wonderful general introduction up to the teachings that we find in the book of liberation through hearing in the Bardo, Bardo Tudel. He gave a kind of a summary, a modernized summary of some of these instructions which are there, which can be very, very useful to use actually for people who are somewhat familiar with these concepts. Probably not for someone who is completely unfamiliar. I wouldn't I wouldn't do that to them, can be quite confusing. But people who are familiar with the language and with the imagery, uh, that's an amazing gift that Khyentse Rinpoche gave to the modern Buddhist practitioners. And he gives a lot of advice, also a general advice for non-Buddhist practitioners or for people who don't practice Vajrayana. And then, of course, there's lots of other literature which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. So that's not the right slide here. Is it? Okay. Sorry, having some troubles. Maybe here. Let's see what I prepared here. Okay. We'll I'll talk a little bit after this about one text that I translated for the Khyentse Vision Project related to the subject, and say a few words about that. And now to reply to the question. Yeah, maybe before we go into the dissolution process, just as a background information, I don't know how much everybody here is familiar with these teachings on the Bardo, these transitional Bardo. The word Bardo means in between, literally. It means a transition, and it can refer to any transitional period. So in the teachings, generally 4 Bardos are distinguished, or sometimes 6 Bardos, depending on how the natural Bardo of life is categorized. You can take it as one, or you can divide it into waking experience, dream experience, and meditation experience. So these 3 types of experience are subsumed within the natural Bardo of life. Then you have the painful Bardo of dying, which is related directly to the question you asked, Jamyang. After this, you have the luminous Bardo of reality. This is the transitional period that most people refer to when they say beings are in the Bardo after death. And then you have the karmic Bardo of becoming, which introduces the rebirth process and ends with entering into the womb for the next life. So the Bardo of dying, it starts actually with the cause for death, which does not necessarily be just moments before the elements start to lose their strength. That can be a long process. So if somebody dies from cancer, for example, the moment that cancer begins in the body, and if that is the cause of death, then that transitional period is set to begin from that moment. And that can take years, of course, if the sickness lasts for a long time. So let's look at the different stages within this painful part of dying. Now what is called the dissolution of the elements. Okay. here. So traditionally, this is called, the language that is used here, I'm sure many of you have heard this, that one element dissolves into the other element. So from the grossest element, beginning with earth, to the most subtle element, wind, and then consciousness. And then further on, consciousness dissolving into space and space into luminosity. So these are the more subtle levels of dissolution. But on the more coarse physical levels, it begins with earth. And earth element here is, when it says earth dissolves into water, it just means that the aspect of earth, which is solidity, strength, stability, that aspect of the physical body starts to diminish. And so this often has these symptoms of the body of the person who is having this experience starts to feel like sinking. I think you described this, Jamyang, sinking into the bed. Sometimes the person has a hard time to lift their head, or they feel like they ask for people to help them to lift themselves up because they have this sensation of feeling this sensation of sinking into their bed. These are symptoms of losing the strength of the stability of the earth element. And this is said to correlate with certain mental experiences. So the first experience that corresponds to that dissolution of the earth element is a mirage-like perceptions. So I have no idea actually what that means in direct experience. This is, of course, these are just images that are supposed to help us get some kind of idea of how perception changes. If Again, I have no experience with that, but some people might be very strong shamatha practitioners and may have similar experience when they fall asleep. So all of these processes are supposed to be similar to the process of falling asleep and waking up in reverse order. And it can happen very, very quickly also. But yeah, so of course I cannot speak from my own experience, but what you read in the text is that the dying person has a visual experience or a mental experience of a mirage. So these kind of flickering images that could appear. Then when the strength of the earth element now has kind of vanished. So now the water element is coming in the forefront, and when that loses its strength, this is when the body dries up. So the mouth and the nose can become very dry. So the dying person may ask for water to drink so they can moisturize themselves, and which I'll do right now. And the visual mental image that corresponds to that dissolution is smoke-like appearances. So this is maybe easier to imagine, that you have the impression as if there was smoke in the room, although there is no smoke in the room. And some of you may have had experiences, if you have accompanied people in the dying process, that some of these can be verified in person. I think, again, we have to be careful. These are all general guidelines, as I think most Buddhist teachings are helping us, find orientation and clarity in experience. But we'll have to see from our own experience whatever the Buddha is teaching, how that corresponds to our own experience. And it's possible that the dissolution of the elements happens very slowly, gradually, and can be traced in our experience. But it's also possible that this happens very, very quickly and that we don't have time to actually observe these. So at least what it does give us here is some form of map that we can orient ourselves. So when we catch some in our own experience, when the time comes, when we catch some aspect of these experiences, we can identify them and maybe find comfort in that, in the sense of, okay, this is actually just, this is normal, this is just what happens in this process. And of course, this will give us comfort mainly if we have practiced the Buddha's teaching before also, because so much of the Buddha's teaching is about building habits, building mental strength, building habits that guide the mind when we don't have willpower enough to make decisions on the spot. I think that's a very important aspect in general of for the Buddha's teaching, and here in particular, because if the mind is not trained well during our waking life, it's not going to magically all of a sudden be a well-trained mind in the moment of death. So in that moment, habits are going to take over. Whatever our habits are, if we are habitually very, I don't know, angry, that it's possible that these habits, can take over. And if habitually we are very anxious people, these habits can become strengthened. So if we find the methods to tame or to train our mind during the waking state, there's much greater possibility for these habits to also become active when that happens, because we might not be able in that moment to just decide how to feel and how to think. So that's going to be a much more instinctual level of experience that we go through. But if we have familiarized the mind a lot during our waking life with wholesome mental states, if we have cultivated the habit of reducing unwholesome mental states, of preventing unwholesome mental states from arising, then this habit will definitely be very, very, very useful and strong, effective in these moments when we cannot decide consciously what to do. So I digressed a little bit here. So we come back now to the third element. So the water element has stopped supporting the physical body, or it's become weak. So dryness is experienced, the smoke-like visions, and then fire is the next in the sequence of more and more subtle elements. And when fire loses its strength, then of course the heat withdraws from the body, so we start to feel cold. And then here in the text that is in the collection of Khyentse Wangpo, the author describes how this withdrawal of heat occurs in the moment of death. It's quite interesting. Maybe we can read some of it after this. So the fire, the heat element withdraws, the limbs first become cold, and then depending on various factors, the heat can start to move up from the soles of the feet up, or from the top of the head down. And the visual experiences that correspond to that are sparks of fireflies. And then the last level of the coarse dissolution of the elements is when the wind element dissolves into consciousness. This is when the breathing becomes difficult. So breathing in becomes more difficult, and longer out breaths, exhalation, happen. It becomes more and more difficult to breathe in and to catch our own breath, until eventually there is no more in-breath. It's impossible to fill the lungs with air. And this is when the outer death happens, but this is not the life. The consciousness is still connected to the body, and the body is not considered dead from the Buddhist perspective, even if there is no breathing happening anymore. There's still a few steps ahead. And the experience that corresponds to that is a flame, like I think it's a flickering kind of flame of a candle, not very steady, flickering. And yeah, so I've been there when my auntie passed away. So that was I think some of these experiences or outer signs can be clearly, of course, most definitely the breath can be very clearly observed, and also with animals. I've seen in Nepal we had a dog at IBA, and I I observed it was very well surrounded. It was very interesting. It was uh, s- um, clearly in the process of dying the last few days. It couldn't do anything anymore, was just lying around, couldn't eat anymore. And then at some day, a couple of monks walked to the dog and started to recite prayers, purification prayers for the dog for maybe 20 minutes or so, quite long. And then they walked away. And I stayed observing the dog, and I saw that then this breathing started to become very intense for this out breath, longer, and then some kind of physical kind of um, stretching and so on until it kind of exhaled its last breath. Um, and of course, you could see the dryness also. When with dogs, it's very easy. You see the nose usually is always a little bit wet with dogs. So there, the nose was completely dry already for quite some time. So you could observe some of these external signs. So this much to about the external dissolution of the elements. I find this really, I don't know if inspiring is the right word. I find it really fascinating how the death process is described in such detail, and in particular with the internal images that correspond to outer dissolution of the elements. And for those of you who have learned about Vajrayana in particular and completion stage, is very, very interesting, because all of these experiences are linked to certain types of experiences that are rehearsed in completion stage practices. So of course, and these are things that we have to learn directly from masters. These cannot be just transmitted randomly, or should also not be learned just by ourselves with online. I'm sure we find everything we need online, but I think it's really, really important to get the connection to a living lineage, to a living tradition through an authentic master, and learn about, if you're interested in these things, to learn about the theory, and then most importantly about the practice. Because these, I don't know if you probably heard the Dalai Lama sometimes speak about his own practice, and in particular his death. And he mentioned once that he was a little bit excited about his own death, because he's been rehearsing the dying process here described through the internal images, and we'll come to other experiences, other aspects after this. And he said he's a little bit excited because he wants to see if all his training that he's been doing for so many years actually kind of is confirmed in the dying process, and how he can apply everything that he's learned when these signs actually occur in the moment of death. I find the confidence quite amazing. I mean, it's a Dalai Lama, so it's not surprising, but it's very, for me, it's very inspiring that to have somebody like this with all the humility and um, the straightness of character that the Dalai Lama represents, then talk about these practices, the efficiency and the profundity of these practices. And Yeah, and so with this we come to the second phase of the dying process. Oops. Yeah. And this is now more directly related to the subtle elements in the body and the subtle mind. So for details, it's very important to I mean, you can read a lot of it online in many, many, many books, but it's so important to connect to the lineage and receive instructions from teachers on these, in particular on these subtle aspects. So just to give a brief overview of what is supposed to happen. So there's two steps that happen here: consciousness dissolving into space. So previously we had wind element dissolving into consciousness, and that concludes the outer breathing process. And then there is still inner, we shouldn't say inner breathing process, but there is the inner movement of winds. And this is described here how this ends. To really understand what happens here, it's important to understand the physiology of the subtle body. So, of course, we don't have much time to go into this now, but basically, the idea is that there is this what is called the central channel and the two lateral channels, the two two lateral channels, and some subtle elements that are in the subtle body that we inherit from our parents, basically. And so when the body develops, when the physical body develops with from the forming of the embryo, the subtle body already develops at that time. So there is this, we can say, kind of a stretch of what we call the central channel. And with that, the formations of the lateral channels and the elements that come from the parents they stay basically located at the two ends of the central channel, with the subtle elements from the father, the white essence, on the top of the head, and the subtle element from the mother, the red essence, at below the navel. And this remains intact until that moment of death. So after the outer breath has ceased, then there is the inner dissolution, which begins with the white element from the top of the head descending, going down. So after the outer breathing has stopped, then the inner elements start to collapse into the central channel. When that happens, the white element drops towards the heart, and this is accompanied by a vision of great, vivid whiteness or white light, a very bright kind of experience. And after this, the red element from the navel comes up, and this is accompanied by a vision of very strong, vivid redness. And these two then meet at the heart center. And the consciousness is supposed to be trapped in between these subtle elements at this point. When the consciousness is trapped in this way, then the experience of what is called vivid darkness or blackness or blankness happens. And with these white, red, and black experiences, there's names for the kind of, in the tantric literature, they all have certain names of wisdoms that appear at that point, and aspects of, we can say, of experiences that correlate to meditative experiences, like clarity, like bliss, and like non-conceptuality. So these naturally occur in that moment. And what's very important to point out here is that this happens for everyone. So this is not something that happens exclusively to practitioner, but what differentiates the practitioner from an ordinary person who is not familiar with this is that people like the Dalai Lama and any practitioner who's trained in these practices, they rehearse exactly that process of dying in their completion stage practice. And And this, of course, this requires so much training before. So for these are very, very advanced, solid levels of practice. So the mind has to be, first of all, freed of useless activity, has to be very strongly stabilized in shamatha, has to have a good, strong understanding of insight. Then trained in generation stage practice, and then also in completion stage practice. So when the mind is sufficiently trained in this way, it can accompany itself, if we want to say like this, through that process by recognizing what has been trained during their practice the whole life. So then when this natural process happens, they can actually identify, okay, this is the whiteness, this is happening in the subtle body, this is the redness, this is happening in the subtle body, this is the blankness, this happens in the subtle body. And then when these essence drops collapse into the most subtle aspect of consciousness, or the subtle winds in the center of the heart, then, and with this, all the I wrote here impulses of aversion, impulses of desire, impulses of delusion. So the three poisons of the mind, they have completely ceased to function at that point, completely. So when the mind is actually really freed of all of these impulses, what remains? The only thing that remains is the actual nature of the mind, and that is what is being revealed at that moment. The issue, of course, is if we have not been trained first to recognize it and then to stabilize our mind in the practice, then this will occur in a flash, and then other experiences will come. Or the first experience that will come, one will faint into complete unconsciousness, which can last for a while, it is said. But for practitioners who have trained themselves sufficiently, they can actually recognize all these states until this luminosity of the mind is revealed, or Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it. And then this is what is called in the Tibetan tradition the experience of tukdam. Tukdam is when masters remain, after they pass away, they remain in the state where the body does not disintegrate, and there still remains some level of warmth around the heart area, which indicates that the consciousness has not left the body, but there's no more breathing at all. There's no brain activity also. So scientifically or medically, a person has been declared dead at that point. But from the practitioner's point of view, these masters are not dead, actually. The body is still on a very, very low flame, so to speak, and there's still, the awareness is still connected to the body. So this is when there's so many examples of masters so I'm most familiar with the Sakya tradition. So there was a great master. His name was Khyentse Rinpoche. He passed away in 2006 in Nepal, and he stayed in this state for 16 days, which is quite exceptionally long. And what the lamas do when this happens, they have to check every day if the consciousness is still connected to the body. So there are certain signs they can observe, like the elasticity, I think that's the right word, of the skin is still there. The skin is still elastic. When you pinch it, it still, comes back. And the body is not stiff. It's still, the limbs are still flexible, and there is still a warmth around the heart area. So as long as these signs are still there, then the body should not be touched, to let the lama, the practitioner, sustain their practice in this level. And then as soon as the consciousness leaves the body, then there's certain signs, like the body collapses and so forth, and then the body can be brought to a cremation place. Yeah, so these are this is the description of the painful bardo of dying, which again happens to everyone, but it can happen extremely fast or it can happen more slowly depending on the conditions, the level of familiarity, the level of practice, and also the conditions of dying. Of course, if there's an accident, then all of this can happen in just a split second and it's finished. Uh, yeah.
Hi.
Janan, you have to
Can you hear me
mute.
okay? Is there an echo now?
Now it's okay, I think. There was an echo, but I think it's finished.
Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Oh, you're muted. Your Shangshung account is muted.
Okay, let's try like this. No, double.
You're muted now.
Is this working now?
Yeah.
I'll just type my question.
Yeah, maybe that's better.
It's a terrible double echo. Okay, does this work now?
Yeah, it seems to work.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a mess with these two. I wanted to say thank you. I see now you've gone on with your slideshow to the next one about Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. So please forgive me, all this connection is terrible today. So in any case, please do go on with the Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo related one, which I see you have set up. And then after that, my final question would be about how in Buddhism we often talk about there's no self, and you mentioned all this
Yeah.
process of dissolution of elements and all. So then, what is actually reincarnating? That would be my final question after this one, in case my connection is cut, just so
All
you
right.
know. But please, okay.
How much time do we have? Until what time?
Roughly 20 minutes more in total. If
Okay.
you can give 10 minutes for some questions and answers at the end
Oh,
also,
all right.
that would
Okay.
be great. Okay, sorry about my connection. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, so I translated this first text on this list by Khyentse Wangpo. Maybe you can share the link or later send it out. This is actually a text by Geluk Lama from the Chone monastery in Amdo called Takpa Shedup. And so Khyentse Wangpo apparently liked the text very much and and copied parts of it, summarized some parts of it, and kept these notes in his room, I suppose. And so when the collected writings of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo were compiled, they also included these notes. There is no indication of the source. Actually, it's the text itself. There's no proper introduction. There's no colophon. At the end, it just says this is an important text or an important article, and that's it. So it's just by doing some research that I found the original source of this writing, which is Takpa Shedup. And so it doesn't mention anything about the death in the title, although I wrote this here, but that's not the actual title of the text. It just says the seminal words, four truths on four truths dependent arising, or something like that. But it does include a whole section on dying, so that's why I thought it's relevant here. It does not go into the dissolution phase at all, which I think is really very interesting and important. That's why I added it here. But he does talk about other aspects which I want to address now. Then there is another text which I hope to translate soon, which is the second here, Instructions to Guide Others Through the Stages of Bardo and Poa. It's not a very long text, but it's really very valuable because it gives quite brief explanations of all these main stages of the Bardo, including the dissolutions that we just discussed, and gives instructions on how to guide others through the process. Then there is another very brief text on how to guide people through guide the dying. Then there is another text which is a little bit longer again, which is the mother text on Bardo, and then a very brief related Dzogchen instructions. So I've worked on the first one. Hopefully I'll work soon on the second one, and then we'll see what happens after that. So in this third part of this text, which talks about dying, he talks about the conditions of death. So I'm going to read here from the text. He says, when the life force is exhausted, it is a timely death, which you can say almost it's a predictable death, because the life force is the lifespan that we have in store, so to speak. Untimely death occurs when the life force has not been exhausted. It may occur when merit has been exhausted due to a fatal disease, for example, or due to other conditions for an untimely death, of which 9 are taught in the sutras. So basically there's 3, and this Khyentse Wangpo mentions this in his other text, there's 3 causes for death: the exhaustion of life force, the exhaustion of merit, and the exhaustion of karma, or karmic causes. When it is said that when all 3 of these are concurrent, then a death is inevitable. It's just going to happen. However, when only one aspect is inducing death, then that can be remedied by the relevant practices. So, for example, if life force is exhausted, then there are certain long life practices that can be done, like Amitayus practice and so forth. When merit is exhausted, which of course is difficult to know when the merit of a particular lifetime is exhausted, so it's probably just good to accumulate a lot of merit as long as we can. But when that is exhausted, we can do positive merit-related actions like supporting Dharma, supporting Sangha, and so forth. And when karmic causes induce death, then we can still also produce karmic causes for long life, such as life release, which is a very common practice in Mahayana countries, to buy fish, for example, that are on the market and then go to a natural place where they can live happily ever after, and to release life, to extend their life. So that is also a karmic cause for longevity. And some recent teachers, maybe you've heard the name of Chata Rinpoche. He lived until, I think, 102 years old recently. He passed away a couple of years ago, and so he very famously practiced life release every year in very big amounts. But the problem, of course, is at some point all of these will be exhausted, and at this point, death just happens naturally. And then, oops, sorry, it's not very responsive. Yeah, I think I'm going to skip on these parts. Basically, here Takpa Shedup explains how at the moment of death, the mind can be either wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral, and that this basically depends on the habits that we have cultivated in our lives, in our lifetime, and the quality of the mind in the moment of death is very important, because it determines how it enters the Bardo and then how it goes on from there. But he says also that it's not very certain, because there can be exceptions. Even somebody has done a lot of good deeds, they can be in an unwholesome mental state just the moment of death, and vice versa as well. It's just we give ourselves much bigger chances to be in a wholesome state when we live in a wholesome way, when we cultivate a lot of wholesome, healthy, positive habits during our life. Then we give ourselves the best chances to be well equipped when the time has come to die. But then he says also that these wholesome and unwholesome states, these refer to coarse perceptions. But when when consciousness dissolves into space and space into luminosity, what we have seen before, then the mind is neutral. There's no wholesome or unwholesome nature to to the most subtle mind. That subtle mind is just what it is. There's no positive or negative quality to it. And then again, it says for the heat, I referred to that a little bit earlier. The heat withdraws. So he explains, for people who have committed strong negative deeds, the heat withdraws first from the upper part of the body towards the lower body, and the opposite is true for people who have committed a lot of wholesome deeds during their lives. And then it says also for where the consciousness leaves, so this is not indicated here, but the consciousness leaves the body it can leave through any opening. The best, of course, is the top of the head, called the Brahma opening. And this is where practices like Poa and so on are practiced. It should definitely not leave the body through the lower parts of the body. And this is also why it said when people die, when we accompany people who are in the process of dying, we should not touch their feet. Because wherever we touch a body, immediately the mind goes there, right? When you touch your right ear, the mind is sensitive at that point, so the mind goes there. So when we touch the feet of somebody who's dying, their minds will automatically be drawn to that place, will be drawn down. And that is not a good way for the consciousness to leave the body when they actually die. So it's the instructions that I've received also from my teachers is that we should remind people to think of their own top of their head. And we can even very gently touch them there to bring their awareness to that point, to the top of the head, so that they are always thinking of that area. And then it's much easier for the mind for consciousness to leave the body through the upper opening. And then what happens then, of course, is habits, as I said before. So this is where, from most people, this is why so many lamas they have all these very profound teachings on completion stage that relate to these subtle states of dissolution. But to be very pragmatic and very direct, most people will not be able to actually apply these methods because they really demand a high level of proficiency. We should definitely learn them and try our best, but it's not easy at all. So there are other methods that are taught in the Tibetan tradition, and not only in the Tibetan tradition, that help us prepare for that moment. And the most famous one, of course, is what is the whole basis for a whole Buddhist tradition, Pure Land Buddhism, is rebirth in Pure Land of Buddha Amitabha. For various reasons, also we won't have much time to, we won't have any time to go to go into that, but uh, it's anyone who has a strong, basically who has a pure intention, pure devotion to be reborn in that dimension or that field of Buddha Amitabha. And again, Amitabha means limitless light, which again refers back to the light of one's own mind, but personified as that Buddha. So if we call on that Buddha who has made specific aspirations to accompany being in their dying and to create an ideal environment for people after their death to continue on the Dharma path, if we generate strong, clear aspirations, then it's possible to be reborn in that state. And for that, of the consciousness should leave through the upper part of the body. So that's why it's also good to remind the dying person of that part. And that's the reason why the lamas, even though there are these very, very profound and subtle methods, they also still teach extensively Amitabha poa practice, Amitabha rebirth, aspiration prayers, and so on, because these are like the safety nets, or the if we're not able to really practice on this very profound subtle level, we have other I don't want to use guarantees, because what is a guarantee in this life? But we have other safety measures to make sure that the experiences after this life will be good ones in the sense of the Dharma, that we can continue and work on the liberation of this mind. So now to talk about, I think, this question that you addressed about rebirth. Let's assume everybody here in the audience accepts rebirth. That's a very important point. And to accept rebirth, and that's, I think, also super important to distinguish, does not mean we have any guarantee for rebirth. Like we don't really know. We have to be, I think, also as Buddhists, we have to be honest about we don't have first person knowledge about whether there is rebirth or not, but we have a lot of indications that indicate that rebirth is probably a thing. And based on these indications, there's logical reasonings, there is a lot of accounts of people who have memories, for them, the memories that are not possible to be confirmed otherwise, like, kids who are 2 years old who remember details of houses, of neighbors, of circumstances of death and so on. They could impossibly know in this life. There's a lot of research at the University of Virginia about rebirth. So if you're interested, you can go into that. So let's assume we accept rebirth. So the question is, what is rebirth if there is no self that is being reborn? And I would like to read this passage here, because he explains it very, very clearly. The way beings continuously roam in samsara should be well understood in terms of the 12 links of dependent arising, according to the Madhyamaka tradition. That is to say, the skandhas, or the aggregates themselves, are not the self, and there is no individual being that is other than these skandhas, than these aggregates. That is, there is no self-sufficient self that continues on to the other world. Full stop, missing here. So in other words, in Buddhism, very famously, the Buddha refuted the idea of a self, of an independent, autonomous, permanent entity that migrates from one life to another. So then what is, when we say I had this previous life and I had this, I will have a next life. It is the mere I imputed on the basis of the skandhas that continuously roams in samsara only on the conventional level, based on the illusory phenomena that are the 12 links of dependent arising. This must be clearly understood. So, in other words, he said there are the 5 skandhas, form, sensations, and so on, all of which are impermanent compounded phenomena. So there's nothing, no entity that does not change that could be the same here and that is the same in the next life. There's no thing that moves from one life to the other. What is called rebirth is just an I that is assumed, that is imputed. And this is the key point here, there is a continuity, there is a dependent arising. And this is if there's one teaching of the Buddha that every Buddhist should really, really, put their hearts into to understand, it's dependent arising. Because everything is based on dependent arising in the Buddha's teaching. So the connection of one life to the next is also one of dependent arising, of continuity, of one thing being the causes and the conditions, not one thing, a multiplicity of causes and conditions that give rise to the next moment of phenomena that are then causes and conditions for the next moment of phenomena, and so on. So in a way, we can say today's I, me, Christian, is the causes and conditions for tomorrow's Christian. There's a continuity, but there is no independent entity that moves from today to tomorrow. But there is like a stream, like a river. There's all these water particles that are called, if we want, the river Christian. But if we want to find one entity called Christian, we will not find it, because it's just a name superimposed on a whole collection of phenomena that arise and cease moment by moment. Like a river, all the particles are just flowing through moment by moment by moment by moment. But we just label it I. So this is the imputation that he talks about here. So, and then he gives analogies. So I want to summarize this with the last slide here. Oops, sorry. Does it stay? Okay. So the first analogy he gives is that of chanting. When a teacher says something, the example given is that the Buddhist teacher teaches his disciples to recite Namo Buddha, Namo Buddhaya, homage to the Buddha. So if somebody has never heard these words, how can they, as a student, how can they come up with that recitation, Namo Buddhaya? So they have to hear the teacher first recite Namo Buddhaya. They have to receive that information, and based on that, then they can pronounce the words Namo Buddhaya. So it's not that this Namo Buddhaya from the student is self-arisen from themselves, and it's also not that the words are transferred from the teacher to the student's mouth, but it's independence on the recitation of the teacher that the students can utter these words. And in the same way, we have other analogies here, the candles, the candlelight of the second, the flame of the second candle is not does not come from itself, but it's also not the same as the first candle that gave its light to the second one. It's not the same light, but we can also not say it's a different light. It arises in dependence on the first. And other example, the mirror, the image in the mirror, we cannot say that that the image itself is what is the object that is reflected, but it's also not different from the object that is being reflected. It's just something that arises in dependence on that object. And then he gives another example, the fire which is born from a magnifying glass. And more. There's many other examples that come from the sutras on how to explain rebirth without a self. So there is, in summary, we can say there is no entity. So on the ultimate level, of course, we cannot speak of rebirth, but we can speak of rebirth, and it is a fact on the conventional relative level of our experience. Just like there is rebirth moment by moment by moment, in the same way, there is no reason why this should stop at the moment of death. Because the actually rebirth, for me, that's my favorite argument for rebirth, is that we learn in science class that no phenomena is born out of nothingness and no phenomena is destroyed into nothingness. Nothing it's called nothing is created and nothing is lost, but everything transforms, everything changes moment by moment. So all the particles, everything in the whole universe, there's nothing that came out of nothingness, and nothing that seemingly disappears into nothing. It's just a change of condition, a change of appearance, we can say. So why would consciousness be the only phenomenon in the world that vanishes at death? For me, that's a very, very convincing argument. There's no reason why, if all the physical aspects of this this identity here, if all of these elements change into their their subtle elements, and then they go back to earth and so on, and into the air, and I don't know how to explain all these chemical processes, but I mean, you know what I mean. So why, if we are not assuming a materialistic view of consciousness, saying that consciousness is just a property of matter, so, and there's a lot of arguments against this as well. So if we don't assume a materialistic view of consciousness, why would consciousness be the only phenomenon in the world that just stops at death? It does not, for me, it doesn't make sense at all. So it's very likely that the mind just continues when the body stops functioning as well. And it just continues, just like the body changes into other dimensions or into other manifestations, the mind also. And what happens then is these are mainly dependent on dependent arising based on karmic propensities, karmic formations. And this is what the Buddha is teaching, to train the mind to create wholesome karmic propensities and to stop creating negative karmic propensities, so that the path can be a good one, and ultimately freeing oneself from all of these karmic conditionings. Okay, so I think that's it. Are you still with us, Jamyang?
He's disconnected.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Christian?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
He can't hear us, apparently.
Yeah, the blessing of Kathmandu. One of the many blessings. Okay, yeah, if you have some question, maybe I can moderate. If there are any immediate questions, or even not immediate, I'm still happy to try to respond in any way I can.
I have a question, if I might put this to the group, because certainly this is a very informed audience. Relative to the new studies going on with Dr. Ian McGilchrist and Bernardo Kastrup and such, seeing consciousness as seeing matter as the product of consciousness rather than consciousness being the product of matter. where do you see that within your traditions fitting?
So I can try to respond first, and then anyone who wants to chime in is welcome. So this very strongly resonates with the Buddhist tradition, in particular with what are called the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but there's different Buddhist tenet systems, Buddhist philosophical views of reality, and the ones in the that have made their way from India, or we can say the northern Buddhist traditions, China, Japan, Korea, Tibet, and so on. There are very strong views that strongly correspond to that perceptions are whatever we call matter, which is in a phenomenological point of view, an experience of the mind, is an expression of the mind itself, is a manifestation of the mind itself. So this is somehow very hard to believe if we knock our feet when we walk around the room and there is a bed standing in the way and we have a pain in the foot. It's sometimes very difficult to kind of say, okay, this is just my mind happening here. I think from one point of view, we can say, where is the pain actually experienced if it's not experienced in the mind? So from one perspective, I kind of still agree with that, because no experience is ever done outside of the mind that is experiencing this. At the same time, we don't necessarily have to, I think, deny the dimension of matter, but maybe put in the forefront the importance of mind relating to that aspect of matter. Whoa, and there shall be light. So that's my first the first aspect that I wanted to stress. So there's a whole school named after this called, or not really named after it, Yogacara school. It's called those who practice, or the followers of the practice of yoga. And the philosophical tradition that relates to it is called mind-only school, that teaches that the three worlds, famously, there's a quote by the Buddha that says the three realms, the three worlds, which means all dimensions of experience, are nothing but mind, are mind only. And of course, there's so many interpretations of what that actually means, depending on what we would like it to mean, maybe. For me personally, what makes the most sense is really this phenomenological dimension of where does experience ultimately happen? And it's always happening right here, right now, in this very mind, never anywhere else. I think where this point becomes even more important is an aspect of the Bardo teachings that we did not address, which I also don't feel very comfortable addressing, is this so-called Bardo after the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of reality, or the Bardo of Dharmata, which is where a multitude of wild and wonderful experiences that can be extremely intense are described in the teachings, which the teachings very clearly, they always say, when people are guiding others through the process, you call the name of that person and you say, you are now having this and this and this experience. Recognize this as nothing else but the manifestation of your own mind, and relax, basically. Just, it's okay. These are just manifestations of your mind. You can relax. You can relax. And
Did Khyentse Norbu have you sit and watch Pig at the Crossing?
I've
His
seen,
movie?
yes,
Which I
exactly.
think is his response to what you've just said, for those who know of him as a filmmaker.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good reference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, quite interesting piece of film. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Greek.
Hello, and thank you. Living also in Vienna, as you did or do.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, and in Bucharest, Romania. I think we have a probably unique project called Ars Moriendi, the art of dying well. To make a long story short, we are 7,000 and counting people after 7 years, and we are seeking for guidance. So we have also a school kind of academia, Ars Moriendi. Please, not necessarily now, but maybe later, maybe via email, if I am allowed. Maybe we can change some ideas, and we are really seeking for guidance and teachings. And there are a lot of also Buddhist teachers in Vienna, but I have no no map. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Chat.
Hello. Thanks, Christian. Thanks very much for the talk. Just a question about something you said right at the beginning. You've touched on the answer probably, but you said if we don't contemplate transience and impermanence, we might end our life regretting things. And I want to ask, who or what is it that regrets? Is regret there, and does it matter if regret is there? Why does it matter if regret is there? And is there consequence to regret?
Well, to very simply, regret can be there can be good regret and there can be bad regret, right? Good regret in the sense of seeing once an action that has not been done correctly or wisely or compassionately, and seeing that as not well done, and having the wish to not act in this way or to do the opposite, maybe. I think the regret that happens on a very, very coarse conceptual level. If you talk in the scheme of the map of Buddhist explanation of consciousness, that would be on the sixth type of consciousness, the mental consciousness. And I think it can be something very difficult. It can be basic, like being stuck in some kind of subjectively, I think it matters a lot. If you're at peace with your life, or if you are very frustrated and you have regret, I think subjectively it matters a lot. Ultimately, maybe that regret will put some positive imprints that then will lead to another course. For sure, that depends on what we do with the regret. But if you ask me, if I think about it, I'd rather live my life in a way that in the end I can look back at it and say, okay, this was, of course, I did my mistakes, but I tried my best, and I'm content to the level I can be content, and make aspirations for a good continuation. But it's true that this is in my understanding, at least, it is on a rather conceptual level. Then, what does that trigger on a more subtle level? I think I'm not sure. I really cannot say for sure. I'm thinking now. This is me just inventing my own stories, but I'm guessing if we are tormented mentally, it can kind of mess up our more subtle experiences as well, or make it at least not give us the mental stability and clarity to recognize what is actually happening, which would be a pity. Yeah. So I'd rather not have regret when I die, I think. That's my short answer. And I think it matters to me, at least on an immediate level, on a subjective immediate level. Yeah.
Thank you
What do
very
you think?
much.
What do you
Oh,
think?
I I don't know. That's why I was interested in asking the question. But I'm sort of, yeah, if the imprints of regret carry on after death, then obviously there's something to be concerned about there. But if they don't, then I don't think it matters if you regret or not. I mean, you know, you might be tortured in this present life if you
Well,
go carry on. Yeah.
well, the regret is just one part of the whole story. What are we regretting actually, right? So we're regretting negative actions. The fruits of these will definitely come. The karma is not neutralized, right? Unless we are liberated from the Buddhist perspective, which is not that easy. Samsara is a very sticky mud pool. Unless we're liberated, so if we regret and we see, oh God, I've done like seriously negative actions, the regret itself may not be the problem, but the result of what we are regretting, that will definitely we'll have to suffer that. We'll have, or let's call it, which we'll have to experience whatever seeds we have sown. We'll have to experience those seeds. They will come to fruition sooner or later. And so I think it can give us, in the moment of death, it can give us some trauma, and definitely the result of actions committed with intention. That is the key point in the Buddhist understanding of karma, is intention. Any intention will condition a result, which will be experienced in harmony with that intention. That will happen until we are free, completely liberated from that. So, yeah, that's the other problem with what are we regretting actually.
That's great. That's very interesting. Thank you.
And Chantal, I don't know how long we have. I'm okay. We can continue. So I don't know if is Jamyang still around somewhere? He's gone. Let's see. Chantal, until he comes
Yes,
back.
thank you. I have a question because you hear a lot of stories, you hear stories about people who had a near-death experience and they are always very positive and life-changing, full of love. And how can we reconcile this with the Buddhist view that dying is a process of intense, painful, and even frightening experiences?
So I'm not sure there's only positive experiences. I think we like to hear only the near-death experiences that are positive. And I'm not saying they are not there. For sure, there are so many. But I wouldn't say that all near-death experiences are only positive. I wouldn't go there. The positive ones, I think, are, and I haven't had one, so I cannot speak from experience, but my understanding is that as the mind becomes more and more subtle and gets, let's call it, closer and closer to this Buddha nature, I think a lot of these positive inherent qualities of Buddha nature, and we have to be so careful how we speak about Buddha nature, not to make it another self in the Buddhist perspective. So just for conversation's sake now, the positive qualities of Buddha nature, I think they get experienced very directly or clearly. There's often in these near-death experiences this images of light and bliss, which for me correspond very clearly to the subtle dissolution, where we talked about, these the element, the essence drops, the tigle, when they move inside the body towards the heart. There's this experience of clarity, this experience of bliss and non-conceptuality. So these correspond to me very much to what is described in near-death experience accounts. Yeah, I think, and this is something quite unique to the Tibetan tradition because they go beyond near-death experience, right? So you have in the Tibetan tradition, you also have a phenomenon called delok, which means those who have returned from the beyond, basically, which Jamin Khyentse Wangpo himself also was. And there's a famous book. It's called Delok. It's the mother of Chagdu Tulku, who describes her journey. Absolutely fascinating. And so they go beyond these near-death experiences and then have other experiences which are not only pleasant, can be very difficult. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I see it. I see there's a lot of correlation. I don't think near-death experiences are only pleasant or only beautiful, although there are many that are described in this way. And I think when they are described in this way, they describe contact with a very subtle aspect of mind, which inevitably we all, of course, we have, because that's just the mind, that's just what it is. But that gets stripped, all the obscurations or what prevents us from experiencing it gets stripped away when the mind gets more and more subtle in that process. So I think it's a natural thing that it happens in this way.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Chantal, by the way.
Could I ask for the name of the book on the Delok experience being put into the chat for
Yeah,
us?
I don't remember the author's name. I think the title is just Delok, if I remember correctly. Maybe somebody can do a quick Google search if it's.
I'm just curious to know because I have had an NDE and I was wondering how many
Okay.
within the group have felt that they have also experienced this, because for me, it was a sudden accident. It was not a prolonged illness. So the suddenness of it created a projection. And quite frankly, I was very happy to be leaving. I have to say, it was kind of like, oh, this is fabulous. I'm on my way out of this mess. And at that time, there was what appeared to me or felt to me to be a communication saying, sorry, you've got things to do. You got to go back. And there was at that point, and from what I'm beginning to learn, the experience of mine, as you point out, becomes neutral. Okay. You hear what is the reality of the goodness of the presence of consciousness, if you will, so that there's no aversion, there's no clinging, there's simply the presence of this space in which the will can act. And that I was instructed, basically, as it felt to me at the time, that there were things that needed to be done. And there was no conversation about that. It was the thing that needed to be done. So here I am. And with that said, I've often, and what I still am looking at, and I think it's a question for anyone who has experienced an NDE, that's a nearness. It's not death. Okay. And I think that that great crossover is the issue that we're not going to get to until we actually do it. Okay. So that in the doing of our participation in consciousness, as you point out, we must stay in the present now so that we can observe what is the best way to stay centered in how we participate and support consciousness. And when death happens, what appeared to me to be the case is you just keep going. That if I, within the paramitas, it's kind of like the joyful diligence. You just keep practicing joyfully and diligently, and no matter what you do, it's not going to make any big difference to consciousness. You just keep doing it. And so I'm always curious to know how to kind of have more words to put on to what the process is, but the process is just going on. And if I want to call it consciousness, if I want to call it death, if I want to call it life, those are all vocabulary words that each spiritual tradition and each philosophical tradition, and each now scientific tradition, if you look at Schrödinger and you look at Penrose and you look at Richard Feynman discussing the passage of light not moving. For Richard Feynman, he says light doesn't move. It's simply a wave that we particularize. And in that particularization, it appears that's what I am claiming is me, that particularization. But I'm actually part of this wave, which actually doesn't move. And that becomes a very interesting place to hang out if you start looking into the scientific structure of how things work. So the book Delok sounds very interesting because it's kind of like, wow, has somebody actually figured that out, or has it always been here? I also think that Dzogchen has some very interesting answers to this, for me anyway, this experience, and how to just keep going. I mean, that's why I think I like joyful diligence the best of all the paramitas. It seems to resonate very highly with what I am about as a person. That's an illusion, that's just swimming along in the consciousness. So thank you for all of your great observations on how to be present at all points.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Christian, can you open the chat? I've got the name of the book here. I can write it in.
Yeah, I think everybody can open the chat.
No, it
we
says
can't.
disabled.
Oh, how do I do that?
I don't know.
Thank you, Nikki.
Pleasure.
But it's not disabled. It's okay.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, I can't seem to write anything.
It's
No,
limited to the host and the co-host.
Is it?
Yes, I can only send messages to you and
I see.
Khenchen Institute.
Okay, I just sent a message. I think you can all see it.
Oh, that's
Can you
the
see?
one. That's the one.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Susan,
Yeah.
I just as a brief response to that, I think it's really, thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's always really very encouraging and important to share some of these things that are really beyond words in the direct experience.
I don't often do it because
Yeah.
the fear of death drives so much conscious and unconscious behaviors that only within the context of a group like this that is really, looking into this question seriously, do you raise that? Do I raise this as something? Because, it's kind of like it. I don't want anyone to, or myself to feel that there's now a judgment that enters into how to relate with a group, except within the context of something like this, where I'm going to assume there's some of you who maybe haven't raised their hands, who maybe have also experienced in some form of another a passage of something like this. So hopefully it helps.
Yeah, I think it helps a lot. And I think it also just shows how the traditions, as much details as they can give us, it's really something so mysterious in a beautiful way, where words just cannot really penetrate, and yet so immediately present, actually. And this is where I think the Buddhist tradition, that's the one I'm, of course, most familiar with, has so many amazing tools, because they give us on all levels of, if we are very devotion oriented, if we are very intellectually oriented, if we are very experientially, meditatively oriented, all of this is it's not like one part is good and the others are bad. They're all part of this experience, and they can all be they need all to be nurtured in the right way. And the Buddhist methods and tools and vehicles allow us to do that in so many different ways that I just find so fascinating and helpful. And this is, I think, also where I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's the right word, where we can see how psychedelic the Vajrayana really is. And psychedelic means literally, now I'm not talking about taking drugs, but psychedelic means to manifest the mind, or to make the mind manifest. And this is what Vajrayana is doing on many levels. And yeah, so it's an incredible exploration, and we really, as much as we talk about these things, and as you say, until we have experienced anything of it, it's good to prepare, but we have no idea. All right.
Were you going to do a prayer at the end?
Yeah, I think we have to conclude now. Jamyang still has not made it back, or has he? Is he here silently?
Possibly.
Let's see and go through the participants.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you back.
Hi. Yeah, the connection is terrible. The video wasn't working. So
Yeah.
thank you, Christian. Very sorry, everybody, about today's connection. Unfortunately, it's pre-monsoon rains in Kathmandu and everything has gone a bit mad. But thank you all so much, and thank you, Christian, for a fascinating explanation. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hope to see you soon. And now I think we can do the concluding verses. So thanks again to everybody.
Thank you, Jamyang, for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's gone. Okay. Just wait to see if it disappears again. Okay. All right. This is the general, very commonly recited dedication prayer. Again, I metered it so we can sing it. By this merit may we be all sing, overcome all flaws the enemy, from the waves of birth, age, sickness, death, from samsara sea all being set free. Thank you, everyone, for your interest, and especially the discussion at the end. I enjoy this very, very much. Okay, I wish you all well, and until we see each other somewhere, somehow.